So the question is that, okay, besides parties, movements, discourses, attitudes, emotions that we are researching concerning populism, what can we know about policymaking and governance? Because as populist politicians arrive to power, they more and more are making decisions. They are governing, they are making policies. So the question is that can we somehow have a description, analytical framework, something about the governance style. So this was our question: what are the features of populist policymaking? The question is not self-evident. On one hand, it seems to be evident because, as I said, they are in power, they are making decisions, so how are they doing it? What are the patterns of this governance or policymaking? However, for instance, Carl Smith argues that there is no such thing as populist policymaking because populists are so different, thin ideology, etc. So sometimes they make leftist politics, sometimes they make rightist politics, which might be true, or which is true, but still we think that we can get, we can reconstruct some features of populist policymaking. So our method, we had double method. On one hand, deductive logic. We try to construct an ideal type of populist policymaking based on mostly the literature. You know what is an ideal type? This is a quote from Max Weber. So an ideal type is formed by the one-sided accentuation of one or more points of view and by the synthesis of a great many diffuse, discrete, more or less present, and occasionally absent concrete individual phenomena, which are arranged according to those one-sidedly emphasized viewpoints into a unified analytical construct. So this is what an ideal type is. I know it's very German, very European, but we think that there is some use of it. And the other, and the other part of the method was congruence analysis, so which is more like an inductive approach. We try to qualitatively assess the conformity of our ideal type to reality. So we chose a case of populist policy making, and the case was Hungarian social policy after 2010. We think that this is an influential case. So on one hand, if you want, a typical case of populist policy making, but more than a typical, it's an influential for many reasons. I don't want to enter the details, but we know that Orban has been in power for more than 8 years now already. They've had a 2/3 majority in the parliament, so there are some features which make this case a special one, let's say an influential one. But basically we think that this is a case of populist policy making. So as I said yesterday, we tend to define a populist thing and contrast it to a non-populist thing. So we also, and this is very problematic, I know, but we also try to reconstruct another ideal type first as a starting point, a non-populist way of policy making. Let's call it the liberal democratic model of policy making, which may embrace, of course, very different types, more etatist, less etatist, more public governance type, more technocratic, etc. But we thought, and I don't want to enter the details why and how because it's going to be too long, but we try to reconstruct this ideal type along 3 dimensions: policy content, policy process, which is in the heart of policy studies, and policy discourses. And in terms of policy content, we think one of the features of the liberal democratic model of policy making is that we have a more or less coherent policy preferences of actors embedded into a system of ideas. We of course know that governments are never 100% coherent, but basically a leftist government maybe tend to, have a leftist policies, etc. Second, in terms of policy content, the usual way of policy making is about majoritarian preferences, of course, because in principle the majority rules. However, in liberal democracies we have this idea of pluralism, the protection of minority interests, etc. Formative role of mainstream policy paradigms. I mean, in policy research, this is a common sense that also the changes are very incremental. It's very difficult to change policies, so changes happen slowly, incrementally. And partly it's because there is a very important role of mainstream policy paradigm, the mainstream knowledge, also mainstream institutions, which make any change difficult. So any change in policy paradigms, new ideas, it's always a very important change in policy making. Now, in terms of policy process, the mainstream model of policy making is, of course, constrained by formal and informal institutions, parliament, the role of government, the laws, etc. Yeah, as I said, it's a slow process. It's a muddling through, as Lindblom put it, muddling through the plurality of interest, the institutions, the procedures, etc. Normally there are institutions, public debates around any proposal. If there is a bill in the media, there will be opposition point in the parliament, there will be public debates talking about this proposal. And what is very important, there is a plurality of viewpoints, plurality of actors at each point of the policy process, from agenda setting to policy formation and even implementation. In terms of policy discourse, we think that normally there are competing discourses, competing policy frames, which then one of them might impose itself on the others. And also maybe generally policy discourses are more integrative policy discourses. So politicians try to legitimize their decisions via using frames which somehow integrate people, society, etc. Now, so we think that when constructing the populist policy making ideal type, that basically all of these features might be violated. If we think of policy content, well, populism, as we know, is ideologically multifaceted and diverse. There are leftist, rightist populism, and even maybe in a case of one particular government, the ideological profile might be less coherent than in traditional governance. In terms of the content also, majoritarian preferences are obviously important, or might be important for populists who refer to the people and they will by making decisions. What is the difference that hostility against unpopular minorities and the lack of protection of minority interest? This comes from the well-known idea of anti-pluralism in populist thinking. We also think that since populists are anti-elitist in principle and anti-mainstream technocracy, they may break those policy paradigms. They may come up with innovative or heterodox policy measures. Okay, innovative doesn't mean necessarily good, but I mean, Fidesz, for instance, is very innovative in coming up with surprising ideas, which may be good or bad, but these are surprising and in a sense innovative, which oppose to mainstream knowledge or oppose mainstream technocratic policy evidences. And for this reason as well, maybe we thought populist policy making may be characterized more often by radical and paradigmatic reforms. And radical changes happen in normal policy making as well, but maybe populist governance might be characterized by more often by these large-scale reforms or radical policy reforms. Now, in terms of policy process, we know that populist politicians basically build on a direct communication with the electorate, and that's why maybe they try to circumvent established institutions, this feature of anti-institutionalism, downplaying veto players, for instance, using referendum in order to circumvent the parliament or establish laws, etc. Of course, anti-pluralism comes into the picture, limiting the participation of opposition parties and civil society actors, and fast top-down decision-making, building on the idea that populism is characterized by strong leadership and an unmediated connection between the people and the leaders. So we assume that populist leaders might want to make decisions fast instead of going through this institutional and pluralist whatever. In terms of policy discourse, we assume that populists make a more extensive use of discursive governance. What is discursive governance? It's also a concept which has been elaborated by other scholars. It means that on one hand, of course, every policy measures is accompanied by some kind of discourses, legitimizing discourse, framing, etc. But discursive governments may also mean that politicians rely more on communication and symbolic measures instead of hard legal or policy measures. Why? Because they want to circumvent institutions, they want to get results fast, so they start talking about problems like migration or whatever, even before or without making substantial decisions about it. So and it may happen that those discourses actually shape reality, and there are some studies about it that, of course, when a politician is talking about something, it may work as a self-fulfilling prophecy, or no, it's maybe not the good term. Society is reacting to the words of politicians, and of course things are happening just by talking about them without, again, undertaking any substantial measure. Of course, we know that populist communication style is a tabloid one, a highly emotional crisis communication, offering simple solutions. I know it's debated whether it's Cass Mudde is arguing against identifying populist communication with this kind of demagoguery, but I think empirically speaking, it's quite there. And what is also very important, and maybe I think at the last version we unified these tools, is adversarial narratives against the liberal elite and unpopular minorities. So this crisis narrative, this Manichaean narrative. Okay, so this is the ideal type. Again, I didn't go into the details, but I think that you realize that it's building basically on the populism literature, what we can distill from the literature, that what characterizes populist politics and populist discourses, and apply it to the policy making. And this is my last slide. It's our prediction matrix. As I said, we took the specific case of social policy in Hungary. I'm not an expert in social policy, but our colleague Dorothea Sikora is. And it was basically a qualitative assessment of those dimensions and features to look at reality. We reconstructed the most important measures in social policy making and try to apply this frame of analysis. So this is a prediction matrix, which basically signals, if there are two crosses, it signals a high conformity to the model. Two minuses would signal, but we don't have two minuses, a very low level of conformity with the model. And as you can see, and again, I'm really not going into the details, but if we look at Hungarian social policy according to our arguments, it is conform very much to this deductive model. So in most of the dimensions, we thought that what happened in Hungary, again, in terms of social policy, just exemplifies perfectly the given dimension, the given feature. There is one thing, that circumventing established institutions, downplaying veto players, it didn't really happen, partly because Fidesz had a two-thirds majority in the parliament, so they didn't have to circumvent the institutional venues. They could just make very easily decisions. So it is not a very characteristic feature. And also the discursive governance was not really important, because again, they had the institutional venues to make the decisions, so they didn't have to rely on extensive communication. Instead, they just made decisions. So this is it so far, and of course what we would like to do is to test this model on other cases as well, and to make it more robust and more convincing, hopefully. Thank you very much for the attention.